Alison Watt. Biography, born 1965. Alison Watt was born in Greenock, Scotland in 1965 and studied at Glasgow School of Art from 1983-88. As a student, Watt obsessively painted portraits of herself. Her paintings first came to public attention in 1987 when she won the National Portrait Gallery's coveted annual award with one of her self-portraits. As a result of this award, Watt was commissioned to paint the Queen Mother, creating more public interest in her work. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, the painting department of Glasgow School of Art was dominated by a group of male artists painting figures in a contemporary style. Preferring to develop her own style, Watt's work is more classical in appearance. Her style stood out against the environmental, neo-pop and conceptual art genres of the late 20th century. Watt became well known for her delicately painted portraits and figure paintings. Her portraits and figures were often situated rooms filled with soft, flat light. They often included backdrops of draped fabric as part of the composition. Watt's exhibition Fold in 1997 at Edinburgh's Fruit Market Gallery marked a turning point in her work. Influenced by the 19th century neoclassical genre of painting, the swaths of fabric that folded around the figures became more important than the figures themselves. The focus moved away from the figures and the fabric became the subject of the work. In 2000, Alison Watt became the youngest artist ever to be given a solo exhibition at the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. Her exhibition shift developed the use of fabric even further, with 12 large paintings each taking around 3 months to produce. The soft textures and folds of fabric became the focus of her work. From 2006 to 2008, Watt was given the prestigious position of Associate Artist in Residence, at the National Gallery in London. During this intense period of painting, she created work for another major solo exhibition called Phantom. In her 2008 exhibition Phantom, Watt returned to the suggestion of figures in her work. It explored ideas about the human figure being present within the folds of fabric without showing the figures themselves, making use of negative space. In 2008, Alison Watt was awarded an OBE for her contribution to the art world, and she continues to hold exhibitions all over the world. The painting, self-portrait. Context, social, cultural, other, this is what was happening at the time. Watt's 1986-87 self-portrait was painted while she was still a student at Glasgow School of Art. She was physically ill at the time with post-viral fatigue syndrome. Her work is narrative in style. In this portrait she depicts herself with her hand across her forehead, as if checking her temperature or as a comforting gesture. When she was a student, she would stand in front of the mirror and paint herself obsessively, creating a visual diary of her life. This early self-portrait points to her growing fascination for the classical human figure. During the 1990s and early 2000s, Glasgow was experiencing a cultural renaissance. The revival in figurative art in Scotland came at a time when American abstraction, pop art and conceptual art dominated Western art culture. Watt's paintings, with their homage to 19th-century neoclassical traditions, contributed to this new interest in Scottish art, drama and music. Influences, where Watt got her ideas and inspiration. Watt was strongly influenced by the 19th-century neoclassical, new classical, genre of painting, in particular Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. Ingres did not like visible brush strokes or dramatic contrast. He preferred modeling form using subtle tones and flatter color. Neoclassical artists aimed to revive the style and ideas the classical period that had developed in Rome in the late 15th century during a period called the Renaissance. Their aim was to capture the classical precision of the ancient art of Greece and Italy. For these artists, the classical style represented the attainment of perfection and absolute beauty in their art. Most of her early work is concerned with self-portraiture and was influenced by the revival of figurative art in Scotland and the artists Adrian Wisniewski and Stephen Campbell. They were part of a group of painters referred to as the New Glasgow Boys who studied at the Glasgow School of Art in the 1980s. Watts' portrait and figure paintings rejected the emotionalism found in contemporary portraiture of the 1980s and 90s in favor of neoclassical muted tones and colors, perfect form and attention to detail. Subject matter: what do you see in the painting? In Self-Portrait by Alison Watt, the subject, Watt herself, looks out of the painting directly at the viewer. She has depicted herself in front profile, inviting the viewer to look directly into her face. There is little emotion in her face, giving it a mask-like appearance. Her skin is pale and similar in tone to her surroundings. Her right hand is placed across her forehead in a dramatic gesture, suggesting that she is checking her temperature or nursing a headache as a parent might for a child. Her head has been placed in the center of the composition and fills much of the picture. Her body and most of her right arm have been cropped by the edge of the canvas and are outside the viewer's field of view. She is wearing a simple white shirt buttoned at the wrist and neck. The shirt is loose-fitting and appears to be too big for her. The setting for her portrait is indoors in a softly lit room. In the left of the background there is a door slightly open with the handle and the attaching screws clearly visible. The door is dark in tone and color. On the left there is a panel which is very light in tone and color. It is not clear what this panel is. It might be a painting or empty canvas on the wall. Scale of the painting: dimensions and the objects depicted. The size of the painting is 30.8 cm by 30.8 cm. The self-portrait is slightly larger than life size. The image of Alison Watt's face almost fills the frame. This makes her the focus of the painting. Watt's gaze looks directly out from the painting at the viewer, and the larger scale demands their attention. The scale of the painting gives the impression that Watt is inviting the viewer to sympathize with her, or comfort her in her illness. Other objects in the painting are placed behind the subject. The door and panel are in scale with the portrait, apart from the screws in the door handle, which seem to have been drawn in a larger scale. This has the effect of drawing the viewer's attention to these round shapes. Style: Alison Watt is a contemporary artist influenced by the neoclassical style. Neoclassical artists aimed to revive the style and ideas the classical period that had developed in Rome in the late 15th century during a period called the Renaissance. Their aim was to capture the classical precision of the ancient art of Greece and Italy. For these artists, the classical style represented the attainment of perfection and absolute beauty in their art. Watt paints in muted tones and colors using soft, blended brushwork. She creates the illusion of form by painting smooth, seamlessly graded tones. Her work is delicately painted with little sign of brush strokes. Her portraits and figures are often situated in rooms filled with soft, flat light. The low tonal contrast gives them a flat, illustrative quality. Compositions often included objects that represent classical art, like draped fabric or plaster casts of antique sculpture. Watt's portraits and figure paintings are narrative in style. They tell the story of times in her life, like a visual diary. This self-portrait tells the story of a time when she was unwell during a period of post-viral fatigue syndrome. Mood and atmosphere. Watt has created a neutral atmosphere in her self-portrait. The soft, diffused light suggests a sense of drained weakness. The expression on her face is tired and glum, and she looks like she is yielding to her illness and waiting for it to pass. Her eyelids are heavy and there is little emotion in her face, giving it a mask-like appearance. The use of a neutral, unsaturated color palette suggests dulled senses that might be experienced while still. Her skin is pale and similar in tone to her surroundings, adding to the atmosphere of weakness. The prominence of the hand on the forehead draws attention to the narrative of the painting. The hand is made more visible by the dark tone of the door behind. This indicates her fever in a comforting gesture, suggesting that she is checking her temperature or nursing a headache, as a parent might for a child. Her clinically white, oversized shirt could also suggest that she is unwell, hinting at weight loss through illness. Composition, arrangement. Viewpoint, the artist and the viewer. The viewer is at eye level with the portrait. This makes the figure look straight out at the viewer. She is looking out of the painting into the space the viewer occupies. Rule of thirds. How is the painting divided up? Alison Watt has used the rule of thirds to place her face in the center of the portrait. The prominence of the hand is enhanced by placing it on one of the intersecting lines. The eyes are placed exactly between the vertical intersecting lines. This creates a central composition that draws the viewer straight to the eyes of the figure. Space. The combination of vertical and horizontal lines and shapes give this self-portrait a sense of confined space. The face is tightly framed between the hand on the forehead, the shoulder and shirt collar, and the background shapes and vertical lines. The viewer is looking through a confined space onto the figure as if in quarantine. Perspective or depth of field. How much depth does the middle and background of the painting have? The depth of field is short. There is little to indicate perspective in the room. There is not much illusion of space between the figure and the wall behind. There are no lines of perspective leading the eye into a distant space behind the figure. The light in the room is muted and flat, giving little sense of contrasting tone. The only area of dark tone is behind the figure to the left. This creates a space for the figure to occupy that is separate from the door behind. Balance. Balance is created in Alison Watt's self-portrait through her use of vertical and horizontal lines dividing up the space to frame the central image. She uses repeated shapes and colors to create unity throughout the work. The portrait is centrally placed and symmetrical. The dark tone on the left is counterbalanced by the light tone on the right. This creates areas of opposing contrast, counterchange. The horizontal gesture of the hand on the forehead is echoed in the horizontal lines of the door handle and the bottom of the panel. The circles of the eyes are balanced by the repeated circles of the screws in the door handle and the curve of the collar on the right. Movement, how the viewer's eye moves around the objects in painting and within the painting. The viewer's eye is drawn around the painting in a circular motion. First to the eyes of the face, and then the eye is drawn up from the bridge of the nose to the horizontal hand across the forehead. From there we are led towards the fingertips and down the right-hand side of the face. We are prevented from exiting the painting on the right by the vertical line of the panel. Reaching the curve of the collar, the eye is led around the front of the neck, along the collar and across the shoulder, up the edge of the canvas and back along the arm to return to the hand across the forehead and the features of the face. Focal point and leading lines. Where does the viewer's eye go to first? The focal point in this painting is the light area between the eyes. This is achieved in several ways. The contrast between the light tone at the bridge of the nose and the darker tone to each side create a V shape. This is enclosed at the top by the shadow cast by the horizontal position of the hand. The symmetry created by the position of the eyes draws attention to the space in between. The vertical line created by the neck, mouth and nose leads the eye to that point. The circular movement around the painting leads the eye to this point. Contrast. The only area of significant contrast in this self-portrait is in the background to the left of the figure. It is balanced by the dark tone of the eyes and mouth. This area of dark tone helps to emphasize the hand placed across the forehead and the paleness of the skin. The general impression is of low contrast. The palette is limited to muted flesh colors. Form has been created through the use of subtle tonal gradation, and the impression is of soft, flat light. Lighting. In this work the light is soft. It has not created deep shadows and leaves the image quite flat in appearance. The flat light brings the background wall close to the figure, increasing the sense of an enclosed space. The light source seems to be inside the room above and in front of the figure. The light source illuminates the hand, drawing attention to it. Media handling and technique. Alison Watt's classical style of painting comes from her interest in neoclassical art and the work of the late 19th century painter Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. Her compositional technique is well organized and structured. It is influenced by the precision and perfection of the classical period. Watt paints in muted tones and colors using soft, blended brushwork. She creates the illusion of form by rendering smooth, seamlessly graded tones. Her work is delicately painted with little sign of brush strokes. She creates light marks with dry brush, creating areas of fine broken texture. Her portraits and figures are often situated in rooms filled with soft, flat light. The low tonal contrast gives them a flat, illustrative quality ideal for narrative paintings. The visual elements. Color. Alison Watt has used muted flesh colors throughout this self-portrait. She has used warm greens, pinks and browns throughout her portrait. The colors are essentially neutral but create a sense of warmth in the painting. The use of a subdued, neutral color palette suggests stillness and dulled senses, adding to the atmosphere of illness. Her skin is pale and similar in tone to her surroundings, increasing the sense of frailty. The richer, darker browns used in the background door are repeated in the lips and shadows, unifying and balancing the painting. Cooler purples and yellow-greens are added to areas of shadow under the eyes, adding to the sickly appearance. Line. Watt uses form to create line. The edges of objects are soft and broken, creating implied lines where objects, colors or tones meet. The soft lines between the fingers, or around the eyelids, are created by the tones of the shadows and not by using a well-defined outline. Where outlines do exist, for example around the nose or down the panel in the background, they are lightly painted with dry, broken brushwork. Her use of implied lines creates the illusion of softly molded forms in a classical style. Watt has used vertical and horizontal lines of objects to frame the face in a rectangular space. Tone. The darkest tones in the self-portrait appear in the door in the background, the eyes and mouth. The dark background tone creates contrast with the pale tone of the skin and clothing of the figure. The effect makes the figure more visible against the background. The soft even light makes the tonal variation of the figure low in contrast. The face and hand are smoothly graded from light tone to mid-tone there is not a lot of dark tonal contrast. This gives the portrait the subtle illusion of form in keeping with the neoclassical style. The subtle tone enhances the effect of the unwell appearance. Texture. The texture is uniform throughout this self-portrait. It has been created using carefully blended brushwork. The surfaces of the objects appear smooth and the soft graded tones and colors create a sense of softness to the skin. The areas of dry, broken brushwork add a slightly uneven texture around the face and in the background. This media handling effect softens the skin. Shape. The dominant shapes in this self-portrait are the rectangle and the U-shape of the face. Watt has used vertical and horizontal lines to frame the face in a rectangular space, the hand across the forehead, the collar of the shirt, the edge of the panel and the side of her face and neck. This shape sets Watt's face solidly in the center of the portrait as she looks out at the viewer. The geometric shapes provide a contrast to the organic, curved U-shape of the face. This helps to draw attention to the expression on the face. This central rectangle is echoed by the door and the panel in the background, giving the portrait a solid structural appearance. Form. Watt has created the illusion of form by using gently graded tone to mold the shape of the face and the other objects in the painting. Although not heavy in contrast, Watt has created an image that has realistic form by implying the fall of light on the objects, creating highlights and shadows. Pattern. Pattern is likely suggested in this portrait through the use of vertical and horizontal lines and rectangular shapes. The rectangular shapes in the background are repeated using contrasting tones of the same color, creating the impression of a blocked pattern. The intersecting horizontal and vertical lines also break up the space into blocks of varying sizes. Although not highly patterned, there is a suggestion of repeated shapes that gives the painting a structural rhythm. This is echoed in the square format of the painting.